Dear Heavenly Father, Lord, we thank you for the blessed study we had this morning and for everyone's input and for how far everyone is being able to understand these things together and grow together as we have, Lord. We truly do have a really incredible group here that's been so blessed with wisdom and understanding and a heart to accept all these things, and we ask that you continue to let it be this way. We ask that you give us minds to hear and understand and to keep in our hearts the information we're about to learn. Help our minds to be able to grasp with the lessons that are going to be taught. Help us to add more information to the knowledge we already have so that it can grow and make more sense in our minds. And please keep us humble throughout all of these things and to really understand the deeper lesson behind all of its meaning so that we know what we are to do in this time period to get ready. We thank you so much, and we pray all these things in the Lord Jesus Christ's name. Amen.
Amen.
Yeah.
Okay, everybody can see it? Although it's kind of a blank screen right now. But this is number 6 from the Guadalupe camp meeting. Repetition and application of history. And I pray that we do all learn and understand, or able to follow along, because I didn't get to go through this as much as I wanted to. So there's a couple spots that I was struggling with. So hopefully, most of the board work is the board work from the previous presentation. So the board work is in many of these is already done, and just discussing or going back to it. And I also, at some point in time, you'll notice that because of size on the page, she has one very long line stretched out, and I wound up not always being able to put it on here. I had it in the last slide, part of it stretched out, but at certain points I cut it off and just went on to the going forward. So anyways, so we saw in the history of Pyrrhus that it occurs in 2 parts. In both parts, he's trying to establish an empire. First is the history in Macedonia against Demetrius. Then there is the history in Italy against Rome. And I know somebody just put a comment in the chat. I have a hard time when I have the slideshow up. If you had something you need to, if you can hear everything. Okay, just want to make sure everything's okay there. So Brother Russell is leaving us, I guess. So God bless. Okay, so yeah, we're glad to have you here with us. So we trace this history, then we considered the king, and we realized that Pyrrhus was representative of Vladimir Putin. Using the succession of kings in the nation of Epirus and leaders of Russia back to the beginning of the Soviet Union and the falling of Tsar Nicholas, we were able to understand that it's also the history of Stalin. So we tied Pyrrhus with Putin, but also saw that Putin was first typified by Stalin. And we can see that Stalin covered the history of World War II. So what we saw last week was that while we see Pyrrhus as Putin and Putin as Stalin, then we can see Pyrrhus as Stalin as well, and linking that back to the first king of the South. We went back to 1929, where Stalin is finally ready to think outside of his own country. It also marks the rise of Hitler. And there's a couple of spots in here, maybe I had trouble too as well because of this. A couple of spots in this particular video that the sound was cutting in and out. So I tried to get what she was saying the best that I could. And so there's a civil war in Spain as it develops into a proxy war between fascism and communism. So you had the 10 years up here where Cassandra places a puppet dictator in Athens, and then 10 years later, Demetrius frees Athens from that dictator, which then sparks this battle that comes on. So here you had, during the time of the Great Depression, you had this 10-year proxy going on as well, and this was the Spanish Civil War that was going on, and it was a fight over how whether or not Spain was going to be communist or fascist. And so you had Hitler and Stalin being behind that, on what Hitler being on the side of General Franco. So let's see, so it was fascism and communism between Stalin and Hitler. We see that it ends on the 1st of April, 1939. So that Spanish Civil War ends here, and the opposite side of the two ideologies of communism and fascism. But they surprise the world a few months later when they go into an alliance. So here they were as enemies, and everyone knew them to be enemies. But a few months later, they go into an alliance. When the Western world, particularly Britain and France, heard about this alliance, everyone knew that this was for the purpose of World War II. And they already started evacuating their cities, such as London, and preparing for war, because this pact heralded war. And this is this pact here, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact that they made in their alliance. And everyone knew that that sparked war, or was saying there's war coming. The war began on the 1st of September, 8 days later, when Hitler invaded Poland. World War II began. As this pact stipulated, Eastern Europe was divided between Hitler and Stalin. We see their relationship was strained because of this division, and also because of a disagreement over trade and Hitler's payment for the services of the Soviet Union. This will become important when we make application. So 8 days later, he invades Poland, and it is Germany, supported by the USSR, against Poland. And Germany, Hitler needed Stalin so that he did not have to fight war on the Eastern and the Western front at the same time, because his ultimate goal was to attack the Soviet Union. So they sorted out their differences, and their alliance became strong again, but it was only temporary. Hitler decided that he was ready for war on the East, and he attacked his ally on the 22nd of June, 1941, the largest invasion known in history, Operation Barbarossa. This drove Stalin into an alliance with the Allies, which he'd originally backed Hitler against in September of 1939. So Stalin goes into an alliance now with Britain and France. In 1945, Germany is defeated. Hitler is defeated. It's divided into East and West by the United States and the Soviet Union. This sparked the Cold War between those two powers that lasted until 1989 to 1991. And this was sanctions and subterfuge. 1989, throughout the Cold War, this is a war that was done through sanctions and subterfuge. And we could say that that was the end of the history. We could say that 1989 was the end of the history. What history is she talking about? It would be the end of
World War II?
Yeah, but in particular?
Cold War.
Cold
War.
Yeah, it's the end of the Cold War, but what do we tend to think what did we generally think that 1989 and 91 was the end of? Yes, the Cold War, but
The King of the South.
The King of the South.
Yeah.
That we would have thought that was the end of the King of the South. So a few years ago, we would have taken this Cold War, we would have talked about Reagan and John Paul II, the United States and the papacy, and an alliance, and we would have said that this was successful, that the King of the South was defeated. Daniel 11:40 is fulfilled, and that the King of the South is removed from prophetic history. Now we know that this isn't true, that this is 1989 to 91 was just marking the end of one story, but there is an Omega history, and we see that in Italy. So she's showing that this was the Alpha history here of the King of the South, and now we're going to have the Omega history of the King of the South. So what happened in this history between Reagan and John Paul II? We're going to go over it later in other studies. And was it successful? Was John Paul II successful in what he wanted to accomplish? I'm going to say no, it was failure. What John Paul II wanted was to defeat the Soviet Union and free Eastern Europe, particularly Poland, and he was from Poland, right?
Yeah.
The Polish, particularly free Poland from the control of the King of the South. He was able to do that and go that far, but what he really wanted was for those Eastern European countries to choose the papacy at least as their moral leadership. And he wanted a Catholic revival across Eastern Europe. In that endeavor, he failed. And he knew that practically from the fall of the Soviet Union. He became very quickly aware that he had failed in that endeavor. So the Eastern Europe sided with the West, right? As opposed to siding with the Catholic Church.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't often talk about John Paul II after 1991, that he was an angry pope because he saw this as a failure. Eastern Europe did not want another dictatorship, and they would not look to the papacy or their priests as their leaders, whether it was birth control, which was for him a big issue, and all those different issues Eastern Europe chose the United States, their liberal economy and way of living after years of oppression. They were not going to choose a moral authority that was as oppressive as the papacy, even though they were Catholics themselves. Interesting that they like this moral authority we seem to be seeing in the United States now that lets them do whatever they want Christianity-wise, right?
Mm-hmm.
John Paul II was a conservative Catholic. What he wanted for Eastern Europe was not accomplished. So this was partly successful and partly failure. Half right, half wrong. The papacy did not come out of 1989 to 91 with what they wanted to come out with. The King of the South was able to return, and we began to trace that. So by them choosing the West, this didn't take out the King of the South. The King of the South still existed, and then he comes back. What we want to do is take Pyrrhus's history in Italy and look at what it can teach us. We talked about 1991. There's one particular country that twice turns to the West. First, at the same date as the end of the Cold War, 1989, and that was Ukraine. They chose the West over communism. So Ukraine chooses the West, and we see that it's Ukraine that comes back into the story, continues on in the story. So threading the needle, Ukraine is there. But we come to the history of 2014, and there is an issue inside Ukraine. That issue is that there are two separate factions. And what do those two factions want? One faction wants to ally with the West, with the United States, and another faction wants to stay allied to their traditional master or boss, Russia, which also sounds like the issue that you had with Thury. With Thury wanting to go with either Rome or go with Tarentum.
Yeah.
So previous to 2014, a leader comes to power, Viktor Yanukovych. He wins the election, and Viktor Yanukovych promising the Ukraine that he is going to ally them to the West. And he's open to the idea that many people want that of joining the NATO alliance. Yanukovych is promising to bring Ukraine into another alliance with the West. So they have this battle that's going on over what side they're going to, part want to side with Russia, part want to side with the West. And Yanukovych is promising to side with the West. He gets elected based on that. But in 2013, Yanukovych drops the act because it was a pretense. He had deceived the people. He made it very clear that he was going to draw Ukraine back into an alliance with Russia, rejecting the West. 2013, go ahead.
No, that was you.
Oh.
I'm on.
Okay. So 2013, that sparked protests known as Euromaidan. Yanukovych was removed from power. And where did he flee? He fled into Russia and lived there, protected by the Russian government ever since. And I don't know if anybody saw that video. I was going to put the link in here, but I had to quit last night and trying to go through this. But the video of the house that he lived in, the mansion that he lived in, off of the backs of the people. And when they went in and started taking everything.
Elaine, I'm sorry, I just have a question for you real quick. I'm going to print this. So is it long-sided or short? I mean, long edge or short edge?
Depends on what you're printing, the slideshow
I'm
or
printing
the,
this. I'm printing this. So you're doing it on your publisher?
well, the PDF file you should probably better print from instead of the slideshow, but you can print either one. You just have to turn the settings the right way. And I can help
Okay,
you with
that's why I
that
was
later.
asking, long or short. I'm gonna go short then. Okay, thank you.
So 2013 sparked protests known as Euromaidan. Yanukovych was removed from power. And where did he flee? To Russia. 2014, he's removed from power, and the majority of the people in Ukraine choose to ally with the West. And they place a government in power that allies to the West. Because remember, there are two factions. The side that wants to ally with the West, particularly with NATO and the United States, wins. They removed Yanukovych. What was Russia's response? They attacked Ukraine. That situation is still going on, just like Thury. Ukraine is now permanently dependent on the West. So it's actually in this period of time too, when whoever came in, somebody help me if I'm wrong on this, that's when, after Yanukovych, or continued on, to a lot of corruption that was going on.
Mhm.
Because that's what we're over now, where Zelensky wants to get rid of corruption. So this whole period of time was all the corruption that was going on, right?
Ukraine's always had corruption. I don't think there's ever not been corruption.
Okay, then Zelensky is trying to,
The Ukrainian people are sick of it, and he was the one who he fought on the platform that when he's president, he's going to do everything he can to finally stamp out corruption, and that's why the Ukrainians picked him, and then Trump put him in this messed up situation.
yeah.
Which is heartbreaking for all the people there. I mean, it's really heartbreaking when you look at and I think it was a recent video that Tess did that showed exactly what, what's her name, who testified, made clear how messed up that was to Ukraine to do that, for Trump to do that to them. Fiona Hill.
Yeah, I was thinking, yeah.
Yeah, it just, when she said that, it just like broke your heart to see what that does to that country. It's so self-serving and evil what he did.
So Euromaidan, literally European Square, was a wave of demonstrations and civil unrest in Ukraine, which began on the night of 21st of November 2013 with public protests in Maidan Independent Square in Kiev.
Yep, Kiev.
The protests were sparked by the Ukrainian government's decision to suspend the signing of an association agreement with the European Union, instead choosing closer ties to Russia and the Eurasian Economic Union. The scope of the protest soon widened with calls for the resignation of Yanukovych and his government. The protests were fueled by the perception of widespread government corruption, abuse of power, and violation of human rights in Ukraine. Transparency International named Yanukovych as a top example of corruption in the world. The situation escalated after the violent dispersal of protesters on the 30th of November, leading to many more protesters joining. The protests led to the 2014 Ukrainian Revolution. During the Euromaidan, there were protests and clashes with police throughout Ukraine, especially at the Maidan Central Square in Kiev, which was occupied and barricaded by protesters, along with some administrative buildings.
Sorry to interrupt. Why are they protesting? I kind of missed it.
Yanukovych, his corruption.
Okay. And so the guy that's in here now is who they wanted in? Okay.
Not at that time, they didn't have that. It wasn't that election then, was it?
I don't know. I'm asking. I mean, I'm trying to get clarity.
I think it was someone else in there before Zelensky, because Zelensky won this year.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The last year, sorry.
Mm-hmm.
So it was someone else that went intermittently after Yanukovych fled that was hanging out till they had a real election.
Yeah.
Oh. And did the guy who came after Yanukovych, they want it or no? It was just a fill-in.
It was just a fill-in, because what they were protesting was Yanukovych's corruption, but mainly Yanukovych was going to fight for them to enter the EU. That's what Ukraine wanted. They wanted to enter the EU, and that's what his platform was when he ran for president.
But then
So
he said,
immediately he won presidency, and he's like, psych, we're going to Russia. And everyone was like, no, that's not what we voted for. And all craziness broke loose. That's what the problem was, and that's why he had to flee.
So I don't know who was in between before Zelensky. Zelensky was last like spring or so when he was elected.
Yeah, that's
That's
why you
right.
had Trump who didn't want to go to his inauguration, and all this was a whole, hullabaloo. It was all last year because that's when he won, I guess, in 2018. And he was
Trump
running.
didn't want Zelensky to win.
I don't think he cared either way. It was just that he was trying to say, "I'll go to your inauguration and make you look good in your country, only if
You do
you do this for me." And that was the
is
part of the
so
quid.
scandalous. He should have Zelensky. See, this is why honesty is so important. If you come real to the people and tell them what's going on instead of trying to win the people, then you will get a lot more respect. I don't care what goes down. At least people know.
Right, but if he did that, he wouldn't have gotten the aid and people would have died because they're fighting a war with Russia. So that's why it's so messed up, because you're putting him between a rock and a hard place. On one hand, you want to fight corruption for the people, but on the other hand, you want to be able to fight Russia so people don't die in your country.
But I think if people did die, then people would be happier dead knowing that they had an honest, good president than for someone who is trying to wiggle the two and balance, the safety of his own people. I think people would actually see that and want to fight even more.
Yeah, I think that would have worked out better, but that's what turned out is what turned out. I don't 100% blame him, but I think it could have been done better on Zelensky's part. But hands down, this is a Trump messed up thing that he caused.
And he was
I agree.
inexperienced as well.
Yeah, he was new and
Brand new in
inexperienced.
politics and taken advantage of probably.
Yeah.
So sad.
Were somebody gonna say something?
I was just saying there are some attributes in there, like Trump.
Yeah. Yeah. So keep in mind though that this period of time after Yanukovych to Zelensky, that's the time when they placed all the conspiracies about Biden and his son being in there, and the corruption that was continuing in there. On December 8th, the crowd toppled a Lenin statue nearby. Protests and clashes increased in January after the Ukrainian parliament passed a group of anti-protest laws. Protesters occupied government buildings in many regions of Ukraine. The protests climaxed in mid-February. Riot police advanced towards Maidan and clashed with the protesters, but did not fully occupy it. Police and activists fired live and rubber ammunition at multiple locations in Kiev. There was fierce fighting in Kiev on the 18th to the 20th of February. As a result of these events, the agreement on settlement of political crisis in Ukraine was signed on the 21st of February 2014 by the President of Ukraine, Viktor Yanukovych, and the leaders of the parliamentary opposition, I'll skip those names, under the mediation of the European Union and the Russian Federation.
Sorry, real quick. I think it was when Yanukovych was leaving that also he helped Putin take Crimea at that time. That was also 2014.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was also a really big issue. And if you see how I saw the Vice coverage on that on YouTube, because they had people there, and the Ukrainian people were the most amazing. They were like, we know that our own government sent these military people, but these cops are also Ukrainian, so we know we're fighting our own people, and so we have sympathy for the people who are stopping us, but we also need to. It was fire everywhere. It was like the end of the world, like how it's portrayed in movies. That was Crimea. It was insane.
The signing was witnessed by the foreign ministers of Germany and Poland, respectively, and the director of Continental Europe Department of the French Foreign Ministry. Vladimir Lukin, representing Russia, refused to sign the agreement. Shortly after the agreement was signed, Yanukovych and other high government officials fled the country. Protesters gained control of the presidential administration and Yanukovych's private estate. And that's what you can see, his private estate. You can look it up on YouTube and see how he lived off of the people's money.
Is this from Wikipedia?
This is from Wikipedia, yeah. Afterwards, the parliament removed Yanukovych from office, replaced the government with, here it is, Alexander Turchinov, and ordered that former prime minister, Yulia, be released from prison. Events in Kiev were soon followed by the Crimean crisis and pro-Russian unrest in eastern Ukraine. Despite the ousting of Yanukovych, the installation of a new government, and the adoption of the Ukraine-European Union Association Agreement political provisions, the protests have sustained pressure on the government to reject Russian influence in Ukraine. And the link to the whole thing is here, if anybody wants to look, because there's a whole lot more after this. This was just the summary. So then we come to 280 BC. We see the king of the south making war preparation of his own country. We need to consider Putin's activity in this history, the preparations that he's been making. You could spread it out over a larger period of time, but his activity is particularly marked in 2016. And as we made application also of the Alpha history, and we talk about what war looks like in our time, we're going to continue to expand and add more layers in what's happening, particularly from 2014 forward. So in 2014, we see that Russia, Putin attacks Ukraine, takes Crimea after that unrest there. And then Putin starts preparing for war. So in 2016, without proving it yet, I'm saying that Putin is establishing control in his own country, expecting war. Part of that preparation in 2016 is setting up his own National Guard, a portion separate to the Russian army that answers only and directly to the president. If we went back to the history of 1989 to 91, how did the King of the South first fall? How is he defeated? We can talk about Reagan and Bush, but then we go to 1989, we pick up a date, and we talk about the fall of the Berlin Wall on November 9. Where was the United States on November 9? It wasn't there. Or 1991, it wasn't there.
What does that mean?
We'll see. So you go through those couple of years' histories, and without knowing the buildup to that history, the previous years and all that brought us to that place, you would have a difficult time blaming the United States, because who brought down Gorbachev? Not the United States, but his own people. His own people rose up and brought him down, just like Tsar Nicholas. That is the purpose of the Cold War.
Wait, so just to understand before we go on, if my mind is following right, so it wasn't just the Berlin Wall, it was the own people?
It was the Russian people that, I'm sorry, yeah.
It wasn't the United States coming in and doing what they did. It was their own people who brought
the own
down.
people from the inside brought it in. And there were other things that led up to it that we played a role in. But what played a role in it was one of the things that I remember understanding before, and correct me if I'm wrong, was where they had the radio in there. What's it called?
Radio Free Europe, and there was a few.
Yeah. So they were spewing in stuff to get the people against their own government. Okay.
But
did I say that right?
Yeah, because what was happening was, because Russia didn't quite fall yet. First, the satellite countries right on the border did, because of Poland. And I forget the name of the group in there, but they were the first ones because of the radio stations and Perestroika? No, not Perestroika, that was in Ukraine. There was a group in there in that time who ended making the revolution. And the moment that one country was able to revolt against Russia, all the other ones, and it was just like a domino effect. And then the moment Gorbachev allowed Western media into the country, and everyone saw how beautiful capitalism is and how prosperous they were over Russian rule, and they're like, okay, it's done. And at that point, he just gave up to the people because they were revolting against him and demonstrating in the streets. But all that was perpetrated because of the also economic sanctions on Russia by the U.S. So,
Brother Jonathan put in chat information warfare.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sister Maroney, she says, blessed Sabbath, happy Sabbath, Sister Maroney. She says, can someone send me the link that Sister Elaine showed? So she wants that Wikipedia link. I know you said that she has to go into the
it's in the PowerPoint slideshow.
PowerPoint slideshow.
If somebody can put it to her in chat, that would be great. I can't do it from while I got the presentation on. So I don't know if you can get it and put it in chat. It's in your email.
Okay.
I'm
on it.
Okay. Okay, so who brought down Gorbachev? Not the United States, but his own people. See, that's the purpose of the Cold War. What you are doing is undermining, destroying your enemy from the inside, and it's brought down in revolution. we need to consider the beginning of our reform line in our time of the end. What did it look like? And where was the King of the North in 1989 or 1991? They weren't there. Because what happened to the King of the South was destruction from the inside, and Vladimir Putin lived through that history. So he sees as a threat not just the United States, but his own people. So this is going back to where we said in the previous slide that he gets his own army put in place. He has his own army put in place to protect him from his own people, his loyalists, right, in his own army. In 2016, he establishes a National Guard, a portion like an army, separate to the army of about 400,000 troops, the strongest troops that do not answer. Go ahead, do you have a question?
Whoa.
Comment?
You realize what happened in 1999 is going to happen again while Putin is in charge. But Putin was disturbed and it created him. 1989, when he got left in Germany and Gorbachev didn't give him any help, that's what created him. He's going to do the same thing.
Hold on. I need to hear that. And I can't focus. Sorry, I'm not a good multitasker. Whoa, hold that thought.
No, I know. Me same.
Okay, I'm almost done.
It's
Okay, say it.
we don't learn from our mistakes.
But for
History
him,
repeats itself and we don't learn from our mistake. It wasn't his mistake.
so in 1989, Putin was in the army for the Russians, right?
Mhm.
And he was in the history. He was stationed in Germany at that point, in Eastern Germany. And when the revolution started to happen, he called, when the Berlin Wall was coming down, he called back to Russia. What do I do? What do I do? They're going to overrun us. And they said, we can't do anything. We're living.
They left him alone.
They left him alone. It had such an effect on him that's when he decided he was, basically it made Putin who he is today. So he came in, but he's now going to be in Gorbachev's shoes when 1989 happened. The same thing is going to happen to Putin. He's going to do the same thing now.
He's getting destroyed by the inside, by his own
Yeah.
people. But
So
he's
it's
got
like
this,
come full circle.
Yeah,
but
I
he's
get
got
that.
this army that he's built up to this circle around him. Did Gorbachev have such an army around him to protect him?
No, I don't think so.
But it's not going to.
No, I'm just saying, I'm just asking a question. So he does have, so anyways, that's the point that's being made here, that he does have this army. So he
I'm
establishes.
sure he did. If there was already revolts happening in Russia and he was always in danger, they had secret police.
Yeah.
You don't have any kind of communist dictatorial power without a secret police. Romania had militia. Everyone had a secret police that worked, especially for them.
So are you saying that Putin is going to come to a place where his country, I'm getting this, but
His
I know-
destruction will be the same as Gorbachev
yeah.
I get
from the
that.
inside. And
I get that. And he's going to come to a point where he said, there's nothing I can do.
Yeah. What happened to Gorbachev is the people were protesting so hard he had to give up. And the same thing has to happen to Putin. And he's had, if you look at the history, the revolts and the marches against him keep increasing and increasing in Russia and increasing. The more, it's like the persecution of God's people. The more he puts in jail, the more rise up against him. The more he tries to silence, the more it grows. So it's just growing, this animosity against him in this country. It's the same. It's exactly the same, like right before communism fell in Russia. It's literally that buildup of we're sick and tired of this garbage. So
Interesting. It's so sad that Americans can't get sick and tired of Trump's garbage, but it is what it is.
well, I was thinking about that because didn't Putin, he has his people deceived as to who he is as well, right? Or he's had them deceived as to who he is, built up an image that is not what he really is doing. Is that correct?
it's not this, because Putin is way more open-handed than Trump is. I mean, the fact that he'll have their little prison cells where there's a glass door that you can see the people who are trying to speak against him, and he's totally just shutting their mouths up. All the rumors of all the people he has secretly killed. It's not the same with Trump. And if you look at the dynamic in the Bible, the king of the north and the king of the south, the pattern of a dictator is the same, but how it can operate freely in its country is different. And the king of the north has Satan behind him. The king of the south doesn't. So the king of the north has to win his time period. and because it's trying to impersonate the true king of the north, which is Christ. So that's that dynamic that has to fit. King of the South is his own business. He's in it for himself, not even Satan, nothing.
State over church,
Yeah,
and King of the North is church over state.
yeah. Because that's what always is the pattern for the king of the South is ultimately he has to be defeated, and the pattern for the king of the North is ultimately he has to win. That's the history of success for both of them, is that this one has to fall and this one has to rise. So it's a little different, but all dictators act the same. So you can see similarities between Trump and Putin like nobody's business.
So, okay, so he builds an army of about 400,000
good.
troops, to the strongest troops that do not answer to any of his generals, no one in the army. They came directly under his leadership, and the only reason you would need that kind of force is to protect yourself from your own people. So if there is ever a coup attempted or a revolution, as the United States tends to do and is doing in Venezuela, they try to turn the army against the government, and that's what they're trying to do in Venezuela. They can turn the army against the government and the people against the government. They can overthrow the government. That's how the United States has acted in multiple countries. What Putin has done is put up a defense for that. He has set up a 400,000 strong army that does not answer to anyone but him and his loyalists.
That is so interesting, though. America's really smart because they know it worked for them, so they're encouraging other people to do it too. Because that's exactly how they broke away from Britain, was through revolution and fighting against their those who were what am I trying to say? Those who were Britain, those who are on top of them or whatever.
So there's a couple of articles if anybody wants to research them. They're in the in your own PowerPoint slide, in the slide that I sent in email, and you can click on them. But there was a couple of interesting things. I didn't get all the way through this one here. This one required a subscription, or there was a free trial offer, but this was last night, and I didn't go through and read it. I read portions of this one talking about what he's doing in Africa with his army, but these were a couple articles that'll go along with pertaining to the army that he has. So the mercenaries of the Shadow Wagner Group, I guess that's the Wagner Group is his army, if I understood correctly. Does anybody know on that?
I think that's so interesting that he has an army in Africa.
But because he's taken and moved on to Africa to try to increase spheres of influence there.
Mm.
So if I understood correctly, though, this Wagner Group it sounds like his army. I had not looked into that before, so that's what I got out of what little I was reading last night. Linked to his personal chef, and the personal chef was the oligarch. And I can't remember the oligarch's name. So when we go to 2016, we see in that oligarch that was his chef. Maybe somebody else remembers what he was also big on something else that he did. Anybody remember? The chef? Why? I can't think of it. And it's one of these big events that happened, I think, with Heraclea.
It's not Oleg Deripaska, is it?
No, it wasn't Deripaska. So when we go to 2016, we see preparation. Then we come into the history of three battles: Heraclea, Asculum, and Beneventum. We already understand Asculum and Beneventum. We call them by familiar names, Raphia and Panium. We have a date for Raphia, November 9, 2019. And keep in mind, this was done back in...
So that group is the one that's in Africa, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Brother,
Christine posted a link to it.
Brother Jonathan says Bourdain. Is that what it?
Bourdain? That doesn't sound... It started with a P, I thought. The name of the oligarch, I think it started with a P. But I have trouble with those names to begin with. But when she's mentioning November 9 here, just remember that this was done several months before November 9, this particular
He
presentation.
says, sorry, different guy.
Okay. So we have already understood that in between Raphia and Panium, you can identify dictatorship being set up.
Prigozhin.
Huh?
Prigozhin?
That might be it.
Powerful Putin's chef Prigozhin
Yeah.
cooks up murky deals.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you put
That
the
was
name
him.
in the chat? Sister Adriana?
Yevgeny Prigozhin, yes.
I will get you the Wikipedias.
You can identify dictatorship being set up and the desecration of a temple. And we have that from other lines of history. We come to Panium. In this history, it's the king of the north against the king of the south. And in this battle, the king of the north wins. The first victory for the king of the north. Soon after that, I'm suggesting from the history of Acts 27 and the line of Pyrrhus, we're going to see a rising up of Rome in 273 BC. When we followed this history, we saw that this is when Egypt sends ambassadors to Rome. Rome is being recognized on the world scene here in 273. And we're going to come back and consider this again in a later study. If this is Panium, we've already identified 272 as the Sunday law. So Panium is 275, Beneventum, Panium, same waymark here. 273 is when Rome is being recognized, coming on the scene.
So he was trying to meddle in the midterm 2018 elections.
Yes,
For
that's,
those,
yeah,
that's
yeah, I
what it
knew he
was.
was a big,
Yeah, you're right.
big on there. I just couldn't remember what it was. It's hard to juggle all these details in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
So 272 is lining up with the Sunday law. So if this is Panium, we've already identified 272 as the Sunday law, the overwhelming flood, the harvest of the world, and the final and complete defeat of the king of the south. He's defeated at Panium, but it's a process, and it's finally accomplished at the Sunday law. So he receives a deadly wound here, and then he dies. The king of the south dies. And we're not talking about Putin himself, but Russia will, the king of the south, the entity of the king of the south. And it will no longer be a power, and you'll have one world superpower, and it'll be the United States. We're left with one battle that is new to our understanding. We bring this to our internal waymarks. We say it's at 2018. This is the Battle of Heraclea. In this history, it's the king of the north that's going to come against the king of the south. It's a victory for the king of the south. We know that that's what we went through in 2018 between Trump and Putin, and we went through that study, and we're going to go through some of that study again coming up forward. Raphia and the king of the south, Raphia, the king of the south, coming against the king of the north. Who is the victory for? Raphia was November 9. The king of the south wins at Raphia. So we're marking and tracing our battles in history, 2018 and 2019 and Panium. At Panium, the king of the south is defeated. Then he begins to fall progressively until he's finished at the Sunday law.
This is so good. Like constantly reviewing this, it
I know.
really sticks.
It helps
into,
me.
yeah,
Yeah, I know.
Yeah,
Because it's a lot of details to be able to juggle and see what is going on.
yeah. Because now I can just this going over this. It just really helped me to connect. Raphia win for King of, and I know we went through this like a lot of times, but I don't know why my brain is just clicking it that if you can just get the pattern. Raphia, king of the south. No, Heraclea, king of the south. Raphia, king of the south, and then Panium, it would be king of the north. So it's gotta. Yeah.
So in the Pyrrhic Wars is what we're looking at: Heraclea, Asculum, and Beneventum. You have Rome attacks Pyrrhus. Rome attacks the king of the north, attacks the king of the south. King of the south wins. At Asculum, you have the king of the south attacks the king of the north, and the king of the south wins. So 2 wins for the king of the south. The difference is in who attacks.
Right.
Then Beneventum, you have the king of the north attacks the king of the south, and the king of the south loses. The king of the north wins. So that's Panium. The king of the north attacks the king of the south, and the king of the north wins. And that's what we're looking at coming up in Panium. Knowing that United States, this is United States and Russia. So what we then need to consider, if we're able to draw it up, is that first alpha history, what that can teach us. It is not going to be so possible to do that in these studies, but if you can keep that in your mind, we're going to bring some of those concepts out and consider it. We can already begin to see how it would overlap. So if we remember right, we had, this actually shouldn't be here. That's only supposed to pertain to here. You can see I copy my slides and I don't always remember to remove stuff. But 272, you have Rome sends ambassadors. First, you have 273, Egypt sends ambassadors to Rome. Then in 272, at the Sunday law, you have Rome send ambassadors to Egypt. That's the maximum flood where.
Claudius Maximus.
Yes, Claudius.
Claudius?
What
I
did
thought
you
it was
say?
Fabius.
Fabius, thank you. Fabius Maximus
Dirges.
Sturgis, which means maximum flood. Pyrrhus is killed. Argos was representing harvest and white, and then that's when Tarentum falls. Okay, so this is where it might get a little messy, so hopefully we can follow along. And these were from a previous slide. The work was already done, so I kind of tried to match it up as best as I could. If we would overlay our lines, we would bring in Pyrrhus in Macedonia, and that's his alpha history in Macedonia. What is the first thing that we're going to notice? There's a 10-year history, a 10-year period leading up to the time of the end. So this is that 10-year period, and we marked it a little bit in a previous, just a little bit ago in this study, that we had where Cassander places a puppet dictator in Athens, and Demetrius then 10 years later frees Athens. So there's a period of 10 there. So the first thing to note is that there's a period of 10 leading up to the time of the end. Do we have that on our reform line? Yes, on our reform line, we have this 10-year period, 1979 to 1989. And it's the history of a proxy war between the king of the north and the king of the south. And this is Afghanistan, and it brings us to 1989. So this is the proxy war between the king of the north and the king of the south. Then we bring into our history, we went from 1989 to 2014, from here to here, marking Ukraine. So Ukraine is marked at 2014, and Ukraine is also marked at 1989, when Ukraine chose the West. If we were to take it back into this history, we mark this at the time of the end, the period of, after the end of the period of 10 years, leading to the end of the proxy war. And this is the first waymark. And what should we see after our first waymark?
Wait, where are we starting?
After 1989 is our first waymark. What do we
Right.
see next?
We see
9/11.
9/11.
Yes, but that's not part the direction we're looking at in this particular study.
Okay.
We see an alliance.
Okay.
You're looking at just the king of the north and the king of the south and what their interactions.
Okay.
So in 2014, we see an alliance between the king of the north and the king of the south. And there was an alliance up here, 303, right? That prepared him for this battle here, which was the Battle of Ipsus. So we see the king of the north and the king of the south in an alliance preparing for this battle here in 2016. So we already hear talk of the alliance, some type of agreement relationship between Putin and Trump. And if you follow United States news sources, it's been a major subject for about the last 2 to 3 years. We know that with the Mueller report and the Mueller investigation. It's been a major talking point and an investigation. And the work into that is still ongoing, but it has been difficult to prove. I would suggest, based on prophecy, we don't have to wonder what is going on between Putin and Trump, why their behavior is so strange. Based upon the alpha history, before we come to war like Raphia, Panium, there's first an alliance, and we can mark that at 2014. So before we come to Raphia and Panium, which are Raphia and Panium, these two, Raphia and Panium, before we come to there, there's going to be this alliance first. So you're always going to see this alliance first.
You know why it's kind of that little confusion tricker upper is because when you go into Heraclea, it should be Asculum Beneventum, but we never just go to Asculum Beneventum. We just say Raphia and then Panium.
Right.
So that's always
And
like that.
Heraclea is before.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we
Heraclea is
always
before.
get mixed up.
So
between-
2016, no, that's right. 2018 is Heraclea. So yeah, I know what you're saying.
Mhm.
We just look at Raphia and Panium. mark that
Yeah,
other
but
one.
yeah.
And we knew about those two back a couple of years ago when that started to open up, that the king of the south was not defeated.
Mhm.
Okay, though a lot of that came out went the wrong direction, but it did open up that the king of the south was not destroyed at 1989. So after 2014, we come to 2016, and this is where we want to go back and consider our lines. In the history of Pyrrhus in Macedonia, that's his alpha history, in Macedonia, the end of a proxy war in 307 BC, this is the end of this proxy war, and then you had an alliance in 303, and where is the alliance then utilized? So they have this alliance, where do they use that alliance? In the Battle of Ipsus, and you have your first battle. So this end of the proxy war, then you have an alliance, and then the alliance is actually to be utilized in Ipsus. So you have the end of the 10-year war, then you have this alliance, and this alliance is then going to be used in this battle in 2016. Did everybody follow that?
Yeah. So there's an alliance all the way through, but it's not utilized until 2016.
And they're enemies,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah. But they come together.
Just like how you had here that Hitler and Stalin were enemies, but they come together.
Mm-hmm. So my question is that they're enemies from the start, but it's after a war that they come into alliance, or is before the war? At what time, at what point are they coming into alliance? I mean, we see it marked, but I'm just saying, if they're enemies, at what point are they actually, do we even have an actual mark when they actually are? I mean, we have,
2014.
exactly, we do see that alliance, but before that, are they just completely enemies and not having anything to deal with each other?
And maybe Adriana can handle that a little bit better than me, but
The king of the north at that point was always warring, they were always enemies. But
Enemies
in
with-
2014, when Trump started to become president, because he wasn't president then, so you can't mark him as king of the north.
but he was friendly with Putin,
The United States was the king of the north, right?
right?
But when Trump came into power, he is the one who now is the king of the north with the US, and now he aligned with Putin. Now you can mark him as king of the north. You can't until he's president, right?
I wouldn't think so, but you have the two of them being in alliance, and the United States wasn't in an alliance with him. It was Trump that was in an alliance with him in 2014.
Actually, that is true, because United States were enemies with Russia. So at 1989, communist was like this bad thing, and it didn't, and they were fully against Russia.
Yeah.
But
So-
then it easily started kind of mingling when we did get some Trump. Yeah.
I peeked it on your screen, and Jonathan asked,
Oh.
so was Obama the king of the north? Is that what it said?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Before Trump.
Yeah.
Yes, because you mark that. In our lines where Elder Tess brings in the application of the Iraq war and everything, it's still the US as being the king of the north in all that history. So whatever the US is doing, whatever president it is, that's who the king of the north is at that time.
So in 2016, this is where the alliance is utilized, and you have the first battle. In our next study, we want to break down this battle, and I need to go through that again too, because I don't know, maybe others remember it better than I do, but I remember the first perspective of Ipsus, but I really struggle to remember the second perspective of Ipsus. So because Ipsus gives us two different perspectives, and you can draw different points from them. So in our next study, we want to break down this battle. That's the Battle of Ipsus in 2016, which is the election, in the context of the US election, and see how that battle was won and what it can teach us. Again, in our alpha history, we can see a division of spheres of influence. We're going to talk more about that as well, leading to 2018, and this is the Battle of Heraclea at 2018. We'll discuss that as well. Then we come to 2019, Asculum or Raphia, and then the Battle of Beneventum, where the king of the south is defeated. So what we learned from this history, when we overlay, is the story of an alliance, and the first battle where that alliance is utilized in 2016. We call that Ipsus, or we would call it the invasion of Poland. World War II, it was the invasion of Poland. I want us to note one particular difference between an alpha and an omega history. In the history of World War II, who's the king of the north? Hitler. If we were to draw up our battles, we would talk about Pyrrhus invading Thessaly. Demetrius, here we have Pyrrhus invades Thessaly. Demetrius invades Epirus. And then you have Lysimachus and Pyrrhus come against Demetrius. And if you remember right from last week, we went through that Demetrius is in the middle, Pyrrhus came from the west, and Lysimachus came from the east, and both came against, and you could call that the invasion of Macedonia, which is here. We come to the history of Italy. And we come to the history of Italy, and they're given 3 names. This is his battles with Rome, the Omega history. You have the Alpha and the Omega history, and they have 3 names: Heraclea, Asculum, and Beneventum. Then we come to the history of World War II, and we can talk about August 1940. This is the same line coming all the way down. 1940 is the first battle or breakdown. This is where they would slide into where when we would this is where I think a couple places where the sound wasn't right, where they would slide in when we would overlay our lines. We would talk about Operation Barbarossa, and that would be the second battle, Operation Barbarossa, in 1941, and then we talk about 1945. These are the descriptions of those battles. Our second and third, we would more traditionally call Raphia and Panium, just because that is where they were first seen in history. This is Pyrrhus's history, an alpha, and this is his omega. So this is Pyrrhus's alpha, and then Pyrrhus's omega. And the difference, and we're going to see it on a couple of slides coming forth, is one is a line of success and one is a line of failure. And if your alpha was a success, you wouldn't need an omega. So I had to steal this one rather than rebuild it too, but it has it all placed in there, and hopefully we follow this. Hopefully I follow it. So in the alpha, we come to the history of 2018, 2019, or Raphia, and then Panium. So when it comes to, so you're down here in this line here. So when it comes to Pyrrhus and Macedonia, is alpha. Pyrrhus invaded Thessaly, and that's Heraclea. And if you remember right, because this is something I struggled on for a while, and Adriana brought it up, Ipsus was not a part of these battles. It was a separate battle in Turkey, right?
Yeah.
Make sure I remember that. In Turkey, it was a separate battle that was in Turkey. It was not a part of these battles here. So not a part of the battle for Macedonia. So Pyrrhus invaded Thessaly, and who initiated that conflict? So you have, when he invades Thessaly, the king of the south, or the king of the north, or the king of the south. The king of the south initiated that conflict, and the king of the north wins. So the king of the south attacks the king of the north wins. Demetrius invades Pyrrhus, and who initiates that? The king of the north comes against the king of the south. The king of the north here comes against the king of the south, and the king of the north wins. So there's 2 wins for the king of the north. Pyrrhus invades Macedonia, and who initiates that? The king of the south comes against the king of the north, and the king of the south wins. So you have 2 wins for the king of the north, and a win then for the king of the south. So we have 2 victories for the king of the north, and 1 for the king of the south. That is the alpha history. And these are patterns that we need to understand that help us to understand our history. So in the omega, Heraclea, Asculum, and Beneventum, who initiated the battle of Heraclea? The king of the north. The king of the north came against the king of the south, and who won? The king of the south. So this is reversed in these lines. Between the alpha and the omega, it's reversed. And Asculum, the king of the south, initiated it, and it came against the king of the north, and the king of the south won. In Beneventum, it was Rome that marched down south. Rome initiated, but who won? Rome. So in an alpha history, you have 2 victories for the king of the north, and then a victory for the king of the south. Then in the omega, you have 2 victories for the king of the south, and then a victory for the king of the north. Everybody follow that okay?
Yeah. So as we said before, the main battle to win is at Beneventum.
Yeah.
That last battle, whoever wins that last battle wins all.
And the success, it's a line of success in our history.
Mm-hmm.
And the line of success in the previous history tells you that the king of the north wins.
Mm-hmm.
So how we can tell
Yes,
the future.
that's right, Brother Jonathan. Huh?
How we can tell the future
Mm-hmm.
by these battles.
Yeah, history.
Yeah.
Beneventum is Panium.
Panium.
Yes.
Yes. So in the alpha, when you come to World War II, August 1940, who initiated that? This was the king of the south. The Soviet Union cut off their trade with Germany. We haven't described what the outcome of that was. Without going into that history, we're saying that it was a victory for the King of the North, because out of their negotiations in that time period, it was Germany that ended up much better off. In Operation Barbarossa, who comes against who? The King of the North comes against the King of the South. And this was, at least at its inception, victory for Germany. Stalin was taken by surprise. Hitler was able to take a vast majority of the country before Stalin even realized what was going on. But the tide turns, and the end of the final invasion, and at the end of the final invasion, it's the King of the South invades Germany. It's victory for the King of the South, 1945. So that's an alpha history where you have the King of the South as that final victor. And in an omega history, the final victor is the King of the North. So our omega histories and our alpha histories are subtly different. We have to not trace just the similarities, but also the differences. The differences can also teach us. They can teach us because we're using the methodology of compare and contrast. We have shown how they compare. They teach us of a 10-year history, a proxy war, and an alliance. But we can also learn from their contrast, because their contrast also forms a pattern. What we can see is that an alpha history, in an alpha history, the King of the South and the King of the North are switched, not only in who wins each battle, but who initiates each conflict. The alpha history for both Pyrrhus and the King of the South in our history, and the Soviet Union in Russia, the alpha histories match. The alpha of Pyrrhus and the alpha of the Soviet Union victory of the King of the North, victory for the King of the North, victory for the King of the South, initiated by the King of the South, initiated by the King of the South. I think she was probably pointing on there, and I lost my train of thought there, so sorry. But she's just going through this chart, that who initiates it and who wins, and who initiates and who wins. So to show us that it's a pattern, that in the alpha history, you have 2 wins for the King of the North and then a loss for the King of the South. And the same thing in this alpha history, 2 wins for the King of the North and a loss for the King of the South. In the omega history, you have 2 wins for the King of the South and then a win for a King of the North. And same, then in our history, you have 2 wins for the King of the South, Heraclea and Asculum, or Raphia, and then you have a win, Beneventum, for King of the North. So it's the patterns that are actually teaching us that we would know what is happening and what is coming. So we take the omega histories and we come to 2018, we see conflict initiated by the King of the North, won by the King of the South. We're going to discuss what that looked like. And we will go through again the Heraclea study. We went through that in the Brazil classes with all the different specific events. I'm pretty sure that's when Trump went to Helsinki, right? And then also
The G8 summit or something.
it was in Brazil. What's the name of I know that Argentina. Is that Brazil? Argentina?
No.
No, but it's Argentina.
Argentina is a country by itself.
Okay, but it was Argentina.
Yes.
Okay. I need to learn my geography better. But it's South America,
Me too.
right? Okay, I was close. South America. Okay. So anyways, we saw Trump turn around against Putin when they were in an alliance, and Putin helped him get elected. But then we saw Trump start to take actions to, and I don't remember all the specifics, and we'll go through it again. But the details of shutting down the agency, the ability for them to interfere electronically with the elections. We saw him take offensive actions against the King of the South.
Wasn't it also at the G8 summit that he didn't go?
That was the one, I think, in Argentina.
Oh, so
I
that
think.
was right.
Yeah, I think it's the one in Argentina.
But okay.
Well, that was the G20.
Oh, sorry.
One of them it was. It was Argentina though, where he went, and it was one of those G20, G8. I don't remember that. I think you're right, G20. And then we saw towards the end of 2018 is when we had Jim Mattis resign, that was when Trump first called for the troops in Syria to be withdrawn, in Afghanistan to be withdrawn. And there was a lot of flack for that. Jim Mattis then resigned, and he was going to continue on for 2 months in time to get a replacement. And Trump said, no, you're fired, because he likes to say that. And so Jim Mattis represented the last general that would have stood up against him. So we come to Raphia, and we already know that the king of the south comes to the king of the north in its victory for Russia. We come to Panium, it's the king of the north now coming against the king of the south, and the king of the north is victorious. This is how we contrast using parables. We're learning about an alliance and another battle, but also there is a difference, and this becomes important when we start talking about the true and the counterfeit. 1945 is the Battle of Panium, and what is 1945 for the king of the north?
And Sister Elaine, can I say something? Yeah, G20 summit, it was Buenos Aires, Argentina. Yeah.
So this is an area where I'm still weak on. I know that I'm pretty sure Adriana has done these presentations more than I have when it comes to the true and the counterfeit. We did go through this, but I'm not real good memory-wise between the true and the counterfeit. But in 1945 is the Battle of Panium. And what is 1945 for the king of the north? It's failure.
What do you mean the true and the counter?
The true and the counterfeit, king of the north. Because remember, you compare the alpha and omega of the king of the south, king of the north, but you also compare the true and the counterfeit king of the north.
Yeah, I'm not that strong on those. I don't
No.
think I did those presentations.
Okay.
But yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
I'm having bits and pieces come back into my mind, but not enough I don't want to misstate anything. But this is in the comparison between the true and the false king of the north. So it's a failure in 1945 for the king of the north. And why? I know you know that answer. Why was it a failure in 1945 for the king of the north? Because they chose the wrong boss, right? So if we thought about the counterfeit, talking about the king of the north, the papacy, in this history of the alpha, does it end in failure or success? It's a failure in World War II in the alpha history, and a failure, Pyrrhus in the alpha history. And alpha history is always a history of failure, because if it was a history of success, there would be no need for an omega.
Right.
If in 1945 Hitler would have won, there would have been no need for the papacy to have an alliance with the United States. So while an alpha history is one of failure, an omega history is one of success. We need to make sure that we accept that, because the implications are serious when we start considering how we apply Millerite history. When we start applying dates like 1844, we talk about Samuel Snow. When we talk about 1886 and 1888, and we start making application, we need to understand parables, because we are so used to comparing, we don't follow how we use parables. We forget there's contrast, and we try to bring everything into our history. So not just the comparisons, but the contrasts as well. Was somebody going to say something?
I was. Can you guys help me understand again? I know I've heard this before, I think, but how, if the papacy was aligned with, the papacy was the king of the north and they were aligned with Germany, and then after World War II, they aligned themselves with the US. But then what was it, 1989, somehow the United States became the king of the north and the papacy isn't, or I don't understand.
So if you think about it, we call the papacy the king of the north because of its prior lines of application. But in our time, it's not the actual king of the north.
But
Germany is, and then the United States is. They do ally at some point, but that title still remains, because if you look in Revelation, it's the image that's created isn't the actual system that was before them. It's just a copy of it in this new system.
So did, at the end of World War II, is that the transition from king of the north went from Germany to the US, because essentially Germany was the world power before, and then the US was the world power after, and then the papacy just aligned themselves to the king of the north. They're not actually the king of the north.
let me and I don't know if this is correct. I need to get this thought out in case it's what it actually is, because you have these battles between the King of the North and the King of the South, and who fills those roles. But who's the counterfeit King of the North?
The U.S. is in our time.
The
I
papacy
get his
was,
question though.
I know.
Because in the end, the counterfeit King of the North is the papacy.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Because aren't they modern Babylon? And then you have, sorry, that's a whole different application, isn't it?
Yeah, so it's the United States. Because the papacy is Grandpa King of the North.
Oh no!
The United States is grandson King of the North.
Hold on, but no, because Christ's church is the King of the North. That's the true King of the North, right? But that's in a different application. And then you have the counterfeit King of the North, right?
Right, so in our application, the United States itself is what becomes Babylon.
Mm-hmm.
But in her reference here, she's
Elder
talking
Par-
about the papacy.
I know, but Elder Parminder in the reunion ones after Germany that he did this past year, he explains how that works. The head of gold was Babylon, the feet, you have Rome and the papacy in there, the legs, but the feet at the end, it's that is dead. When it died, it died. What comes back is that same thing in a different system. It looks different. If you look, because he made it make a lot of sense, and it was really clear the way he laid it out.
So how does that explain the counterfeit and the true?
Because the counterfeit and the true, and who is going to go head to head with God's people, is the papacy. The counterfeit King of the North in the end is going to go against the true King of the North, God's people.
Right.
So-
So the Protestants,
And that's why
Protestants in the United States.
No, going forward, that's why, because she's mentioning the papacy here, that's why, and I'm saying this out loud because I need to get it in my own head to make sure it's straight, and any feedback is welcome. Because that's why you have Francis preparing the liberal side. Because the counterfeit liberal Catholic Church is going to go head to head with the true King of the North, liberal.
Okay.
can
Well,
someone
Parminder said
explain?
was different, I don't know.
We'll have to go back and review the reunion one she's talking about too. Go ahead, Brother Jonathan.
Okay, so 1798 was the papacy the King of the North or Rome?
Oh, 1798, you go back into that history that he's been opening up, where Josiah Litch did all that history, and the King of the North was actually Turkey. I think that's outside the scope of what we're talking about here, but it's Turkey and Egypt in 1798.
That's after 1798, isn't it?
Yeah.
In 1798, you had the King of the South was France, and the King of the North was the papacy, or was it Rome?
That's, you got to watch if you have the presentations, and I'm still trying to absorb it and get it straight in my head.
1798, Ellen White said it was the papacy.
She did.
Yeah. Afterwards, in the application coming after that papacy fell, then he transferred it to Turkey, I think, or whoever Brian Smith said afterwards in their time.
So
It isn't.
and then it goes back to the papacy, and then to a nation, and then it goes back to the papacy. And it seems like there's like a pattern there. The King of the North is the papacy at one time, but then it switches, and then it's a nation, right? It was the papacy, and then it was whatever it was, Turkey.
If you're gonna make the papacy Babylon and the King of the North again, then you have to put the legs under the feet. Do you understand what I'm saying? If you want to take that statue and say, no, the papacy is the King of the North again, you have to remove the legs, take the feet, put the legs under the feet.
What he's showing in Germany, and this I'm still trying to think through, what he's showing in Germany, because we all know this, the verse in Jeremiah, I think it's chapter 50, when it talks about the lions that are coming. First, the lion, Assyria, and then
The lion and the young lion.
the lion and the young lion, Assyria, and then Babylon and Nebuchadnezzar. And he's actually saying, and I went back and I've listened to this a couple of times, because I would have thought that meant the papacy and then the United States. But he's calling the United States the Assyrians and the papacy the young lion. because the young lion comes back. And that's the counterfeit, the counterfeit king of the north that comes back during the Sunday law history, as far as I'm understanding. Which makes me go back and wonder the question that I've always had. We saw it on the slides that Egypt sends ambassadors to Rome. What that all means, I don't know. But that in 273, Rome came on the scene.
So when you say that you have to put the legs under the feet, if you do that, well, haven't we done that anyway? Like, we have done that. The papacy has come back at least a couple of times.
No, I don't see how we have that.
Well, I'll explain, because you had the papacy in 1798, but then you had someone else as the king of the north for a period of time, but then you had the papacy aligned with Germany, and then they disappeared again, and then you had the papacy aligned with the United States, and then the United States is the king of the north, and then the papacy comes back at the end. Because if we're saying that the king of the north right now is the United States, and not the papacy, then are we not doing that?
Going back to this paragraph, in what she's saying, 1945 is the Battle of Panium. And what is 1945 for the king of the north? It's a failure.
Mm-hmm.
So if we thought about the counterfeit, so you're looking at the king of the north and the king of the south, Germany and Russia, or USSR, right? So if you thought about the counterfeit, talking about the king of the north, the papacy in this history in Alpha, does it end in failure or success? So for the counterfeit, there's a difference between the king of the north and the king of the south and the counterfeit king of the north. I think is the distinction that is happening, that there's a counterfeit king of the north, and then you have these battles because the king of the north, the papacy, the counterfeit chose the wrong boss. But the counterfeit in the Omega history chose the right boss. And the
when you're saying the counterfeit, who are you saying is the true king of the north?
If I'm that's God's people, Christ, the true king of the north. And so you have to get rid of the king of the south. And when you get rid of the king of the south, by choosing the right boss, and in our Omega history, the counterfeit has chosen the right boss.
Yeah.
And so the right boss will defeat the king of the south.
So the papacy is always the king of the north then. They're just...
I don't know if I've heard that said, but what I'm hearing him say, if I'm understanding correctly, what I'm hearing him say is that the United States is the Assyrians, and nobody is going to expect, what is it in Habakkuk? Is Habakkuk where it talks about, I'm going to tell you a thing that you're not going to understand, nobody's going to believe it's going to happen? And I think it's in Habakkuk, that nobody will understand, nobody's going to believe it's possible. And that's historically, he was saying that the Babylonians are going to rise up and defeat. And at that time, the Assyrians were the great ones in power, and nobody could have seen the Assyrians being taken down. But Babylon then rises up, the young lion. And if I understood correctly, he's placing the lion, Assyria, the Assyrians, as the United States, and then the young lion as the papacy that comes afterward.
Who is saying this?
Parminder in Germany. So the thoughts and questions we've always had about the papacy, that eventually it does come back, because the papacy, the counterfeit, Babylon or the Protestants are the daughters of that true counterfeit. I mean, yeah, true. I guess you call it true counterfeit. I don't know if that's an oxymoron, however you say that. How do you be a true counterfeit?
But you don't want to lose your thoughts, Sister Elaine. Were you done with your thoughts?
I think so.
Okay.
And I just say go and watch the Germany presentations, and unless I'm getting things wrong, because I've listened to some of them a couple of times over, and I'm like, wow, because I've always thought that the papacy must come back. And the battle is going to be between the counterfeit king of the north and the true king of the north. And that's why she's lining up and showing us all the stuff that Francis is doing, and how right now Francis in the United States aren't even in alliance, aren't even in agreement, right? They're in disagreement. That Francis is this liberal pope, right?
That's why I'm confused about it. Is like I get the whole thing about the papacy coming back. I get it about us being the true king, or us and Christ being the true king of the north. But what I don't get is how you have the papacy and the United States, and which one is the king of the north if they're not joined together.
I think it's good to remember too what the word counterfeit means. It kind of means the same. They're not, it's not actually the same things they're doing, but they're doing the same things.
Yes,
That is
yes,
so good.
yes, thank you. Because that's the point that he brings out in Germany, and that's probably where maybe you came up with it on your own. I don't want to say that. but that's the point that he makes in Germany, is that the United States, or what we're seeing in the Protestants, they're not a counterfeit of us. They're not a counterfeit of God's people. It's the papacy that's a counterfeit of God's people. And right now, you see the papacy building up to counterfeit the message of liberty and freedom. And you know what I'm saying? So at the same time you have us understanding equality and liberty, you're having the papacy doing the same work.
So it seems that the United States, and historically the nation, it's just a beast that the papacy is looking to ride, right?
Yeah.
It's not actually the king of the north. It's, well, I mean, I guess that's mixing two different things up. But
I don't know how to really answer that, but if you look at it from the counterfeit, if you're looking at it from, maybe it's a matter of looking at it different lines, because in World War II, she's mentioning here that the counterfeit chooses the wrong boss. So the counterfeit is the king of the north, the true counterfeit. The counterfeit is the king of the north and chooses who it's going to align with for its battles. So in the history of World War II, the papacy chose Germany to be the king of the north as their proxy, so to speak. And so here in the Alpha, or in the Omega history, the king of the north chose the United States. And so, but the counterfeit king of the north is going to be the one that goes head to head with the true king of the north. And right now, to take what Sister Tony said, that a counterfeit is one that looks like the genuine. And the genuine is learning about equality and liberty and racism and sexism, right?
mm-hmm.
What is the papacy all about right now? What is Francis all about right now?
Same thing.
I don't know, with him smacking people's hands.
Yeah.
And then too,
I would say, with all honesty, I actually felt bad for the Pope in that situation, because like that woman grabbed onto his hand, is like yanking him, and it's like he barely even touched her. I felt bad. I almost wanted to say something, but I was like, oh no, it's gonna look like I'm like.
I only saw the headlines. I never went in and looked at it.
I saw it. Well, he was visiting someplace, I can't remember, and there was this, I think, an Asian woman or some woman, okay, and she was holding, he was like going to say hi to the people, right? And so she gets a hold of his arm, and then she, he's like trying to walk away and continue, and then she tugs on it, right? like, oh my God, that's a Pope, and I got it, and so, yeah, so then he turns around and he smacks her hand to let him go.
Maybe he's showing his true colors.
I know, and then he
If you
apologized.
watch the video, he didn't smack her hand. He just kind of like grabbed it. He was upset. You could tell by the dirty look on his face.
I know. I saw the look on his face. You should have saw it. It was like, what the heck? Why are you grabbing my hand like that? And I know, but I think he didn't touch her hand. You didn't see that?
Well, I mean,
I saw him go like this.
Everyone
maybe it was like, oh, that's enough.
apologize and
That's
kick
enough.
No, it was not like that. If you looked at his facial expression, it was like,
So maybe
his face
behind
is one thing, but he didn't slap her hand, is what I'm saying.
he
was
didn't
trying
stop
to-
her.
He was trying to get her to let go, because she was like yanking on him. Like,
Okay, so let's see. So we're talking about the king of the north, the papacy in this history of an alpha. Does it end in failure or success? Failure, World War II, alpha history. Failure, Pyrrhus, alpha history. And alpha history is always a history of failure. Don't start that.
He looked so mad.
I know.
You can share
So-
screen with it later because
No, it's a video on you can find it. Wow.
With that said, Elaine, then I just have a question because I just want to ask now before I forget. If an alpha history is a history of failure, and we know that the alpha history of the papacy was World War II, are we saying that the papacy is going to be successful in their Omega line? Don't they ultimately lose, or?
well, ultimately because these are battles between the king of the north and the king of the south where we're looking at, but that's a different battle between the two king of the north, the counterfeit and the true king of the north. That's a
So
different battle.
how is the Omega line a line
I
of
pray that
success?
was the correct answer, but I'm pretty sure that's the correct answer. So what'd you say?
So how is the Omega line a line of success? Like which part would be the Omega line then? Because
Well, you remember that these battles are preparation for both King of the North. No, sorry. This battle is preparation for the King of the North, the counterfeit King of the North, right? And then you have the preparation battles for God's people in the scattering and the gathering. Kind of, it's not necessarily battle, like this scattering and gathering. And when God's people are gathered, right, then his people are ready. And then you have the King of the North, when they win that last battle, then they're ready, and then boom, they're going head to head. And is that the battle of Armageddon or something different? Okay, but anyway, then they go head to head, and then it's this big battle.
So my question is, at the National Sunday Law, we say that the United States rises up as the King of the North in charge of the UN and everyone as a seventh kingdom.
Mhm.
Right?
Yeah.
But we also say the papacy rises up at the King of the North at Sunday Law.
Well, because keep in mind that the king of these battles between the king of the north and the king of the south are bringing to one power. And this, I don't know if I don't have all the understanding, but I'm going by what I've been learning, and that I've always wondered about the papacy coming back. And that is what he is pointing to, that the papacy comes back. So it's a preparation. You have to, the king of the north, the counterfeit king of the north, uses these different battles because what he ultimately wants to do is go head to head with the true king of the north. So when you get the king of the south out of the way, then you're going to see the true, the true counterfeits, oxymoron again. You're going to see the counterfeit king of the north is going to go head to head with the true king of the north, God's people. And that's the papacy, because the counterfeit looks like the genuine. And that's what the papacy looks like right now.
And they're both churches.
And they're both churches, and they're preparing their people.
Mm-hmm.
And who brought it up? You? They come out of scattering and they're gathering. So the papacy is now doing his correct work. Say Satan, however you want to do it. And he's gathering his people. And God's work is being done correctly. And he's gathering his people.
Right. So they're mimicking us.
Yes.
Not the United States as a kingdom.
Right.
So are we saying that there's two lines, or is there two lines that we're talking about here? The United States and Russia are the king of the north and the king of the south on one line. And then on another line, you have the papacy, which is the counterfeit king of the north, and us as the true king of the north.
Yeah,
I know.
That would make more sense.
Yes.
Yes.
So how do we come to that, like that we can run two
Well,
separate?
we did it in the studies.
Yeah.
If you go back to the notes that we did in Brazil, because it's helping me kind of somewhat remember bits and pieces of it, but we went through the true and the counterfeit.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got these battles that are these lines that are these battles between these king of the north, king of the south battles that are all telling us a story of the end. But you have in the Omega history, you're going to have the king of the north win, right, at Beneventum, and go on, and you see the sixth head falling and the seventh head rising. I don't know how it actually plays out, but I have always wondered about that verse where you have Rome comes on the scene, and we've seen that in the line that Rome is then recognized, and I know Jonathan, you and I were talking about it a while back, And there's a lot of confusion still in that area.
But though when that one comes on the scene, it's not with the power as the king of the north yet.
You're talking about 273, right? And I tell you what, it still actually has me looking at Pence. And I don't know that, but I'm not good at this stuff and putting things online, but it still has me looking at the role that Pence is playing where he's at.
Because he's Catholic?
Because he's Catholic. He's, yeah, I don't know.
So when that,
But he's conservative, so I don't know.
in 273, you still have the king of the north, the big one being Seleucus. Not Seleucus,
You know
but
the history
whoever-
better, so I'm not good at that history. So yeah, you're right. It tells a whole nother.
Because you had Egypt and then the Turkish area. That's the big Daniel 11, king of the north, king of the south. This one was the one who still had control of the majority of the areas. Rome was just now getting to enough power where they're like, oh, we can recognize this guy now. That's 273.
So I don't know, and I'm going to be going to the Germany ones more and more. I don't think I quite finished all of them. But he does a lot of talk about the third angel. When does the third angel arrive?
I'm just starting though, so I cannot even speak on that.
Okay, so let's go back into here. So let's see.
How many slides? Sorry. Real quick.
I think there's 30.
Okay.
So an alpha history is always a history of failure because it was a history. If it was a history of success, there's no need for an omega. In 1945, Hitler would have won. If in 1945 Hitler would have won, there would be no need for the papacy to have an alliance with the United States. So this is her actually saying that. So the papacy plays a role. Otherwise, why this statement here that the papacy, if Hitler would have won, there would be no need for the papacy to have an alliance with the United States. So you're definitely talking about multiple lines. So
But the papacy had an alliance with the United States in 1989.
Correct, and it's not in alliance right now.
But that statement is suggesting that there would be an alliance between the papacy and the United States, and there was. It's not necessarily saying that there will be another one, although I still believe there will be.
I don't know if they're saying that, but it kind of would seem like it if Germany was to do the work that the papacy wanted accomplished, then the United States is the one to do the work that the papacy wants accomplished. And if it failed in 1989, then it's going to be successful.
So is United States a proxy for the papacy?
That's what I think.
Wasn't the goal in 1989 to overthrow the King of the South, which they did?
Say that again?
Wasn't the goal in 1989 to overthrow the King of the South, which they did in their alliance?
We just read that in one of the previous slides that John Paul II was not successful in his endeavor because what he wanted was to turn the whole, okay. He wanted to turn everything back to Catholicism. He wanted everybody to look at him and come to him as the Catholic Church as being the moral leader. So if he failed in 1989, John Paul II failed in 1989, then wouldn't that suggest that at the end of the line that he's going to have a success at getting everybody to look back to him as the moral leader, and then that's what brings about, or that's not what brings about, but that's where you see that then you have the battle between the counterfeit and the true King of the North.
The failure in 1989 for the papacy was that Reagan or Bush or whoever rejected the papacy after the King of the South victory, and the papacy didn't get to fulfill their overall plan of.
They wanted to swallow back up those countries to Catholicism, and they lost. John Paul II lost those countries, the Eastern Europe, to the West. So the goal of the papacy, the goal of John Paul II, was to get those Eastern European countries to be back on the side of the papacy. But instead, those Eastern countries chose to side with the West. Yeah. So if that's the case, then does that make it then that at the end, he's going to succeed in getting these nations back? It'll be a success for the King of the North, but it's confusing because we're looking at the King of the North as the United States. But
I think that when you're looking at the papacy coming back and coming back and coming back, we don't necessarily have to follow the pattern of success and failure, do we? Because it seems like they've failed continuously, and when they come back in the end, they're gonna fail again, aren't they? Or do we
Yeah,
count
and
that
probably what we need to go back and look at when she did the studies on Fatima and in the counterfeit, they would probably be very helpful to go back and look at, because yeah, Babylon and the Protestants are doing the work of the mother, right? But anyways, lots to think about.
Sister Elaine, you know you finished this slide.
I didn't read this.
Yeah, because you were at Snow, right?
Oh, okay, maybe we did. Yeah. Okay.
But then you went back here because
Okay.
you were explaining the point.
Okay. Thank you.
Mhm.
So if we did that with the counterfeit, because we need to remember that the papacy supported Hitler in World War II, they went into an alliance with Hitler. So if the papacy supported Hitler, that ended in failure. In the Omega history, does the papacy make a mistake in choosing the United States? Is Panium failure to the United States and the papacy? No. It's a complete and total success. We're going to go back over those lines and discuss them in more detail. So we're able to take this first history of Alpha, and it can also teach us about the Omega. And those differences form a pattern where we can learn from them as well. There's one other subject to discuss before we close, and that is discussing the story of these battles. Because as we can see, we have lined up 3 battles, and that's Heraclea, Asculum, and Beneventum, with the invasion of Thessaly, invasion of Epirus, and invasion of Macedonia. And then the invasion of Poland, Operation Barbarossa, and then the invasion 1945, right? Okay, so let's see. So we've lined up these 3 battles, and it's most easily and simply stated as Heraclea, Asculum, and Beneventum. 3 neat names. So when we discussed Heraclea, Asculum, and Beneventum, we see that it's 2018, 2019,
Where
and
did it say
Panium.
Operation Barbarossa?
I said Operation Barbarossa right here. It didn't. She's talking specifically about Heraclea, Asculum, and this is the line of success here.
Mhm.
Okay. So when we discussed Heraclea, Asculum, and Beneventum, we see that it's 2018, 2019, and Panium. But when we bring in our lines, then there is a previous battle, and that battle is Ipsus. So we brought in the Battle of Ipsus here as well.
Can I say something?
Uh-huh.
Operation Barbarossa is not the night of No, what is Operation Barbarossa again? I'm getting.
When Germany goes to invade Russia.
Mhm.
The Night of Broken Glass was
I
way
was right.
before.
That's
Okay,
the
okay.
nine.
Yeah, it's when Hitler came to rise to power. That's
Mhm.
way before.
Okay.
That was against the Jews, not the Russians.
Mhm.
So now we're not just discussing 3, now we're discussing 4. So 4 battles, Ipsus, Heraclea, Asculum, and Beneventum. What can we do? What we can do, just to simplify, is take the names of our battles, and one of the things we will do probably starting our next study is look at these battles in application, because we don't have 2 battles, Raphia and Panium. We don't have 3, Heraclea, Asculum, and Beneventum. We actually have 4 battles, because the story begins with Ipsus, where the first battle, you have the king of the north and the king of the south in an alliance. We have Ipsus, Heraclea, Asculum, and Beneventum. And what mode of warfare decided the battle of Ipsus? That was the elephants. And what mode of warfare decided the battle of Heraclea? Elephants. And Asculum, elephants. And Beneventum, elephants.
So we know it's going to be all information warfare throughout all.
All of them.
Mhm.
So in 2016 is the Battle of Ipsus. So we have 2016, Heraclea 2018, Asculum 2019, Beneventum is Panium,
Which is 2021.
which is, we know is 2021. What we already have built into our message is 4 battles, 2 of which have already passed. Well, now actually we're here.
Now we're 3.
When this was done, we were here, but we're here now, or just after. And these 2 have the same mode of warfare as we find in Raphia and Panium. So if we want to know what Raphia looks like and what Panium looks like, she's saying the same thing that she said about Raphia before, where she said, if you want to know what Raphia looks like, look at Heraclea. So she's saying the same thing. If you want to know what Panium and Raphia look like, you look before at the other witnesses. And with the witness of 2 or 3, everything is established.
So that's interesting. After the Battle of Panium, does the true and the counterfeit King of the North go head to head?
I don't think it's at Beneventum,
I said
but at least with
after.
the Sunday law, yeah.
I said after.
Yeah, after, yeah. But the Sunday law is what it seems like.
Because those,
I
because
don't
we
know how it
understand these
happens.
battles as preparation battles for
Preparing the way for the
exactly.
final showdown between the
Exactly.
counterfeit and the true King of the North.
Exactly. So that's interesting that after this, it's going down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's
Because if-
what's the true king of the north again?
God's
God's people.
people.
Christ.
Okay. So then what's
It's the great spiritual battle of the Sunday war history between the power, the battle for your mind. You've got that going on now, but this is the great battle. And when you come into that history, that's where people are going to be presented with all the rain has fallen, right? They're in their harvest time, right? So the rain has fallen. They've had their plowing, they've had their seed sowing, they've had their former rain, their latter rain. Their latter rain starts at Panium. Now comes harvest time. And harvest time is now you're going to be presented like we're presented with equality. What are you going to do? Well, I believe in equality. I accept it. Well, will you have as a male, will you have a woman boss? No. Boom, you're done. Kind of thing. I don't know if that's that blunt, but.
So we're never going to fight the Protestants or the United States. That's never going to be our job.
I don't know.
But in essence,
They're playing a role in bringing us to the final battle between the counterfeit and the true King of the North.
but in essence, you are actually fighting the United States when you are standing for people's rights, if that makes sense. You're fighting against, you're in America fighting for Americans to have the right to what the Constitution was for us. So we are typically in these battles, wherever you fall, as those tests goes,
So when you're doing that, you're fighting against the United States.
Exactly. You're fighting against the United States.
Not against the papacy, because the papacy is also fighting for equality and rights.
Right now.
Yeah, but
Are we saying it's going to change at Sunday law and they're going to revert back?
I don't know about that. I don't know.
Hold on, but you got to see that those are different lines within there, because you're talking about a people within the midst of all of this, if that makes sense.
Mm.
Sorry, you're talking about a group. Remember, there's just 2 classes, period. Boom. If you're on the side of God or you're on the side of Satan. But within those different groups, you have the priests, Levites, and Nethinims. You have 2 classes. But at the end, within those 3 groups, you have ultimately if you're on the side of Christ or you're not. So when those tests comes to you within each of your waymarks of close of probation, all of that, those where you stand is prepping you for, I kind of got lost in how I was explaining that, but hopefully that started to make sense. But
I know,
there's a lot of lines.
The issue that I'm having is when we make the papacy the sole king of the north, I think it's detracting from what our lines have been saying. Do you see what I'm saying?
I don't know.
Because it doesn't make sense to not make the United States now has nothing to do with being the king of the
I don't know.
business.
I don't know how far he's going and what he's taught so far, but what about those passages? What about those passages where she talks about the United States reaching across the abyss and shaking hands? I don't know.
Can the papacy and the United States be one? I mean, not like that, but what I'm saying is that
An alliance makes
exactly
sense, yeah.
alliance.
But one being the sole doesn't.
Exactly.
Oh,
That's what I'm saying.
I have an idea.
I don't know that I'm trying to say that one is the soul. I don't know how it's going to look like. I don't know how it's going to look like, but I just know that they represent the counterfeit, and the Protestants apparently don't represent the counterfeit, because the Protestants were chosen or what have you by the papacy. I would have thought when he was going to talk about the young lion, the lion and the young lion, that he was going to talk about the papacy and then the United States, but that's not what he said. He said the United States is the Assyrians and the young lion is the papacy. I'm pretty sure that's what he said. But
Can you share that video in the chat so I can get it?
It's like a whole it's on the Finn website or Finn YouTube channel.
Brother Jonathan, what were you wanting to say?
Yeah.
I just had an idea, and I'll just, it's two stories that I'm thinking about with what we were talking about earlier, how there's these two lines of the King of the North and the King of the South. Or sorry, one line of the King of the North and the King of the South, and the other line of the true and counterfeit King of the North. When you have the King of the North and the King of the South, that battle, you have to follow that idea along without considering, I think, without really considering God's people. It's a battle between the King of the North and the King of the South that culminates at the Sunday Law. But the battle between the true King of the North and the counterfeit is, if you compare and contrast, you have Christ and his church. He's the husband and we're the bride. And then, so therefore, if you compare that, Lucifer, his bride, would be the papacy at the end, and the battle's going to. And so, I don't know if you look.
We missed
Are
that.
you-
You cut out.
You cut out.
Oh, okay. Here, I'll move. I'm in a bad spot, I think. Where did it cut out at?
I don't remember.
I know.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you have the King of the North and the King of the South. You have to look at that as one single battle, and that's between the United States and Russia. So and that culminates at the Sunday Law. Am I still coming through all right?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's one story that we have to kind of keep together. And then you have the true King of the North and the counterfeit. And when you look at the true, you have Christ, and his bride is the church. So therefore, if you compare that to the counterfeit, the counterfeit would be Lucifer, and his bride is the papacy. So the battle in the end is going to be between one church and another church. And that's on a whole different line than the King of the North and the King of the South.
That's what I was
So,
saying.
yeah, that's what I was kind of picking up from what you were saying. So I'm thinking, if you keep them separate, then it kind of seems less confusing. I don't know if that's actually what they're teaching or not, but when you have the Protestant churches, that's still part of the King of the North and the King of the South, I would assume. So we actually have these two different stories.
Because
And
I
they both
thought when Tess went over the counterfeit, didn't she line up those lines with the movement?
Which
Well,
line?
Oh, no. Brother Jonathan is responding.
Didn't she overline which lines with the movement?
The Fatima lines of the counterfeit. Or am
Yeah,
I-
like that. So she is making that comparison then. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's what I thought she was saying. It was counterfeit because you have us versus the papacy. You have the United States versus the King of the North. And the King of the North, the people have two choices, us or the wrong side.
I don't know. I don't know about that. But I know that God's people are within either if we're looking at the United States and we're looking at Russia, in both places you have God's people and you have those who are not God's people. So I don't know where that stands.
I don't know. I mean, fact check the things that I'm sharing. I'm sharing as best I can. I'm understanding from the things that he's saying.
Yeah, I have
So,
to watch those.
But it's like there are different lines that are going on between what's eventually going to culminate in the showdown between the counterfeit and the true.
Yeah.
Because right now the battles don't have anything. And then the Islam presentations, was you that talked about that last night, right? The Islam presentations that Brother Itabo did are really good to watch to understand what was the role of Islam in the first woe.
Well, what I brought up in that, what I was understanding was that, because how you saw that big catastrophe, 9/11, all of that, and everybody's like, oh, scared, what it's going to look like in the future. But actually, it just took away that whole entire fear, because for God's people, you're sealed, and that big whatever is going to happen is actually protecting you and preparing you for the work you're about to do. Right. Which is so amazing.
Because the work of Islam protects
exactly
and helps propel God's work to go forward.
Yeah.
Just like in 1840, well, even prior to that, with I think it's in the first woe, where it opened the way, and it opened the way for the scriptures to be coming down into out of the mountains and into the people now. You lost your
My
battery?
computer died.
So I can plug it in for you.
Yeah.
So it opened the way for the Reformation. Then in the Millerite history, at the end of the second woe, it opened the way for the message. Remember that what happened gave a great impetus to the work. It was the confirmation of a year equals a day in prophecy, but it gave a great impetus to the work. They work as our protector to go forth and do the work. There's a lot going on all at once.
Oh,
Okay.
thank you.
So those are on the Kenya Binding Off Messengers YouTube channel. And those of you that are sitting here probably have those in your DVD stacks, I think. Okay. So understanding 2016 and 2018 teaches us what we need to know about 2019. So we need to go into the Battle of Ipsus to find out how that was fought and what that looks like. We need to go into 2018 and see the relationship between Trump and Putin break apart and then rebuild again. And that was where they had that secret, I think it was Argentina where they had the secret meeting, right? Where he had no, the interpreter was not allowed to, she had to turn over, the interpreter had to turn over the notes.
That was in 2018. So yes, that was 2018, and that was a G20 summit.
And it understands, okay, so then we'll see what they're fighting over. And then also project that onto 2019, because we need to know what we're expecting to see. As Elder Parmenter has said, we misapply history and come looking for a hot war because we haven't understood parables, followed on by the advancing light on methodology that has been advancing now for quite some years. We need to understand parable teaching. It's the foundation of all the histories that Elder Tess has taught. And without the methodology behind it, it would fall apart because we are seeing these battles as parables. So we will discuss Ipsus and Heraclea. We also want to bring in the concept of World War II. In the history of World War II, it's not talking about battles, it's talking about invasions. So now it says 2016 is Poland, that was the invasion, right? So 2019 is Operation Barbarossa. And what do they teach us? World War II brings in another element. What it brings to show, what it begins to show us is that the position of the King of the North, his location caused him to fight the battle or war on two fronts. The King of the North, that would be Germany, being that King of the North. It was because of his location, geographical location, he was forced to fight on two fronts. And it's not all a story of United States against Russia. Now we see it's two fronts. So it's not just the US against Russia in our history, it's two fronts. It begins in the West. World War II begins in the Western Front that began in 2016. So when you follow the news, and we really need to be following the news because it becomes important. If you follow the news, you would see the condition inside the United States. More and more division, more and more it is becoming clearer and clearer that it is in the condition of a civil war. Because what Donald Trump is doing, he's fighting a war, but not against Russia. World War II has already begun in application. We're well into it, but he's fighting the West, his allies, NATO, the Democrats, his own institutions. He's fighting for those three branches of government. And this is war on the Western Front. And what we were talking about at the beginning of this is how Mitch McConnell, prior to the election, and from 2014 to 2016, blocked Obama from appointing judges and delayed the process so that when a Republican was in office, then the Republican would appoint those judges. And he was successful in doing that, which is why Trump was able to place so many judges into their positions, and which helped him to conquer, I don't know if he's completely conquered, the judicial system, because it's the three branches of government. And in 2016, he won the executive branch. So in 2019, war on the Eastern Front, we also need to consider that the war on the Eastern Front looked a lot like the war on the Western Front. Other than some change in the viewpoint in World War II, the fronts look the same. It's the same mode of warfare. It's still going to be information war. So you have, here at 2019, we began war on the Eastern Front. The last lesson about what this war looks like, I would suggest that it's built into the story of Pyrrhus and Demetrius. It gives us another thing to consider about what this war looks like. When in the history did Pyrrhus and Demetrius ever fight? They never fought a single battle. Using politics, they were able to weaken each other, defeat each other, and that without fighting a single battle. When Pyrrhus invaded Thessaly, they never fought. When Demetrius invaded Pyrrhus, they never fought. At their final meeting, there was no battle. So we said that this is the story of the king of the north and the king of the south. I would suggest that it is another witness that it looks different than how we would have expected it in the past. They never openly come against each other on the field. It's worth noting something that we need to look into, that when Demetrius invaded Epirus, Pyrrhus did defeat a general of Demetrius in hand-to-hand combat. Pyrrhus met a separate army led by a general of Demetrius, and they decided instead of their armies fighting, they would save their armies and fight in hand-to-hand combat on the field, and watched by their armies. Kind of like David and Goliath, I guess, huh? Pyrrhus met the general of Demetrius, and Pyrrhus won. He struck him, it's believed, across the neck and across the thigh. He was about to kill him before the men of this general stepped in and saved his life and removed him from this battle. So Pyrrhus and Demetrius never actually fight. So there is a victory here for the king of the south. We bring that down, and where that fits is over the waymark of Asculum. It is hand-to-hand combat, not directly with Demetrius, but with one of his generals. This is the only battle that's fought in this history, and it's not with Demetrius directly, but with an ally. What we will begin to do next time is to start, do you have something to say? Oh, is to start looking at these battles. We want to look at Ipsus, break it down, and see what it teaches us about the 2016 election. Then we want to come to Heraclea and talk about what happened in 2018. They can give us some understanding of what this war looks like. Another thing we want to do is look at this alliance, what we can learn from 2014. And that's that. So anybody that's able to go and watch, prayerfully we all can, watch the Germany presentations. And if I'm understanding anything incorrectly, please help. But I know I heard him say directly that the Assyrians is the United States and the young lion is the papacy. Any questions or comments?
Tony, I agree.
With what?
She was shaking her head no.
Well, if nobody has any comments.
Which presentation was it again? You said it was in Germany where he talks about the lion in Assyria.
You're going to ask me for the specific one. I could not
He
tell
said
you.
presentation.
Well, like it's in Germany, was it? And you figured it was one of the possibly the 30.
It's all of these, and I think I've listened to all of his. I haven't listened to the other ones, but I've listened to all of his, and I've been going through a couple of them more than once. But he's reviewing vow number. You can see that he's reviewing vow number 21 and 24, which is extremely important to understand. He talks about he either owes us an apology. How does he say that? Can't remember how he worded that. But he talks about the conflict that was going on and why vow 21 and 24 were written the way that they were. Mm-hmm. And because he was not able and did not have the freedom to read it as he would have liked to have seen it written. So that's a paraphrase, poor one probably. But now that the shackles are off is the way he describes it.
That's Brother Jonathan's thing.
Now that the shackles are off, he is free to speak these things. And that's where he's talking about the 2520 as well, as in it not being the longest prophecy. That's where he's talking about Uriah Smith was right. All of these things are coming out. And I believe it's part of our testing us. So look to those things and with prayer, I don't know, look to those things and see, can we go forward and understand what he is saying? And
Yeah, I only
because they're very important things that he's saying in Germany.
I watched the first one, and but I didn't. It's like 25%
Yeah.
way through of Germany.
So there's quite a few in Germany, and they're all very relevant to understand and watch the evidence as he lays it out. And plus he refers back to the evidence that was laid out back in Brazil when it comes to Islam, and then Tahiti, and then also just the review that he does here. The stuff that he says about the 2520, I've heard that before. Somebody posted in the chat the other day looking for anybody that knew what videos those were. And I don't remember what videos they were, but I remember sometime in the last couple of years him talking about the 2520 and how he says that the church is right. We were wrong. We called it a time prophecy. So this isn't anything new he's saying. He said it before, that they're right, that Leviticus 26 is an intensity, and that we took it and we made an application of it. So so there's a lot of light that's in Germany, and I don't know what's going on in Uganda, but one of the brothers messaged me that there was a lot of new light coming in Uganda. So praise the Lord. And if nobody else, then we'll close in prayer and break for lunch. Adriana's either in deep thought or I don't know.
It's really a way of calling people out.
Jonathan, would you like to close in prayer?
Sure. Dear Heavenly Father, Lord, we thank you for all these excellent conversations and discussions about things that we're still trying so hard to understand, Lord, and we thank you for giving us the opportunity to come together and to discuss these things and to continue to dig into them further. Lord, we just pray that you'll continue to shine the light upon us on these topics and help us to understand. Lord, they're so broad and there's so much involved in them, and I think about how we're going to share these with the people, Lord, and all I can do is just trust that these things will all come together, and they will be much more shareable than they've probably been for us over the past however long each of us have been here. I'm looking forward to seeing how this will all come together and be something more concise and something that we can share probably in a simpler manner than the way we learned, Lord. So I thank you, Lord. I pray that you'll continue to bless us with the time and the opportunity to view all these studies. And I pray that you'll continue to bring us together to discuss them. We thank you, Lord, for all these things. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
You pray for lunch?